Thanks for your time tonight. And I'm going to go through climate change from a Catholic perspective, and this is more or less the outline. I'm going to go an overview of the problem, talk about my background, why I'm involved, and hopefully motivate you all to get involved if you're not already. Talk about the Catholic faith perspective, and then what can be done. And there's a really great simulator called En-ROADS that MIT Sloan put out, and I'm going to go through some examples there. There is good news, it's not all bad news, and kind of a call to action. I could give you a kind of an overview. I used to do that, but then when National Geographic put this short video out, it's so nice. It does a much better job. So I'm going to let you watch this instead.
Human activities, from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than a third since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.
So I think that's a really nice, concise summary of the problem itself, which you probably know most of that anyway. But anyway, who am I? And I guess really, why should you listen to me? I was brought up Presbyterian, but I've been a Roman Catholic since 1986. And I've spent 33 years at ExxonMobil, well, Mobil first and then ExxonMobil. And I was an Arctic geotechnical engineer for part of my career. Roughly, I'm guessing about 20% of my career. And geotechnical engineering is a branch of civil engineering. I was involved with foundations, pipeline routes. So what happened was back in 1987, I had a really unique opportunity to get on this icebreaker at Barrow, Alaska, and it's near Prudhoe Bay. And we went up into the ice north of Prudhoe into the Beaufort Sea. And this is a group of scientists and a group of engineers from various oil companies. It was a joint industry venture. And the issue was that Mobil at the time and virtually very few companies had put any structures up in the Arctic. Here's one of the scientists coring into the ice. We're up there to get basic properties. We had to find out how thick it was, the salinity, how old it was, because the older the ice is, the stronger it gets because the saline portion gets spit out. And we're using remote sensing to get thicknesses. It was, honest to goodness, I was one of the luckiest guys in the world. This was a fantastic trip. I loved going up there. One of the more interesting problems we had was putting pipelines, because these ice sheets would raft up on top of each other, and then they get really deep keels. So, and they move around. So, and I'll show that in a video. But then they can gouge into the seabed. So we had to figure out how deep to bury pipelines should we get a discovery. And so there was a whole host of really fascinating problems. And I was fortunate to work in that, I had a great job. But what you're going to see now is the rapid change that's happening in the Arctic. And this is you're looking down at the top of the world. And when you look at the video, it's a time lapse I'm going to be showing you. By the way, the oldest ice here is white. And that's the stuff that rafts on top of each other. And this can be decades old. And the thickest it was back when I started my career in 1980 was about 150 feet thick. So it really would get quite thick. And then the seasonal ice that would come and go with the winter is in blue. And you're going to see the seasonal ice come and go. But in essence, in the 80s, when I started, there was very little open ice that ever happened at the end of the summer season. But you're going to see quite a bit of change happen. The multi-year ice is disappearing. The ice coverage is lowest since satellite monitoring started in 1979, and the historical record that goes back to the 1800s and from the Eskimos and the Aleuts and some ship records. The Arctic may be ice-free in September as soon as 2030, and that's a staggering fact. The last time it was ice-free was more than 200,000 years ago, based on paleontologic data. And the video is you're gonna see the ice volume. So when I was working up until about 2004 in this part of the business, we knew the ice was getting a bit thinner, so the volume was decreasing. But you're gonna see that the ice massively changed after 2004. This is from NOAA. Once again, it's a time lapse. We're going to come down and look at the top of the world. Same view as you saw before. This goes very quickly, but that's 1990, okay? 91, so you can see how fast it's going. You can see the ice, there's a natural gyre where the ice spits out over Greenland. These are the icebergs that go into the Atlantic Ocean. That's what sunk the Titanic. But there's change going on, but it's very subtle through the 90s when I was working in that area. And then see, it's still fairly subtle, 2004-ish, and this is about when I left. And then watch what happens with the open water. The gray and the white is disappearing. Here's 2015. Look, there's virtually no multi-year ice left now. And I don't care what anybody might say about that. There is absolutely nothing normal about that. That is the first thing that I had from a work experience, but then my personal experience, I'm a scuba diver, started doing it in 2013. It's just, if you ever get a chance, it's incredible, the marine diversity you get to see. Thousands of species of corals and sponges. It's a symbiotic ecosystem. And this is a parrotfish. So the reef itself is alive. It's it's kind of a rock substrate, limestone type of substrate. But then the surface is a live coral. Parrotfish, actually, that's part of their diet. When you're diving, it's pretty noisy down there, actually, because you can hear them crunching on the coral. And what comes out the back end is actually coral sand. So when you see these beautiful coral sand beaches, that's thousands and thousands of years of parrotfish and some other ones. By the way, it's a symbiotic ecosystem. But the reefs are declining worldwide. This is, once again, a National Geographic photo. This is not enhanced. That's the amazing colors. And this is a bleached reef, also from National Geographic. And the bleaching is correlated to warm waters stressing the corals. and the reefs have significantly declined over the last 30 years, really in parallel with the Arctic ice. Mass bleaching events happened starting in 1998. Then you can see the years, but 2016, 2017 was the 2 years that had the biggest negative impact on the Great Barrier Reef. And the Great Barrier Reef is kind of like the Amazon of the underwater. You can see it from space. So if you familiar with it, it's on the northeast coast of Australia, and it's 1,000 miles, 1,100 miles long. And in area, it's about the same as the area of Japan, but it's underwater, obviously. But we lost 50% of the Great Barrier Reef in just 2 years, 2016 and 2017. I know this year was not a good year. It had another mass bleaching event this year, but I have not seen any firm numbers yet. But it's the problem is the reef can restore itself, but you have to have the temperature change. The temperature has to go back down to quote normal. Corals are like humans. If you go up a degree, or if your body temperature goes up a degree or two, you feel sick. Well, that's what happens with corals, and they don't just regenerate and adapt. You can't adapt over 30 years. It's something that happens over millennia. So what's happening? We're seeing ecosystem collapse, and about a quarter of the fish species in the oceans, and about a quarter of the world population relies on fish for their protein. So we're seeing the beginnings of could potentially be pretty significant problems for the world in terms of food source. So why does this matter to me? Well, my oldest grandson was born in 2013. Every year after his birthday, every single year after 2013 has been the hottest on record. I mean, just let that sink in. The 19 warmest years in recorded history have occurred in the last 21 years. There's no reversing this unless we can do something about greenhouse gas emissions. And he wants to scuba dive with me someday. Matter of fact, he talks about it all the time. And we watch some of my GoPro videos from scuba diving. He wants, and I want to scuba dive with him, but things are changing. There are projections that we could be pretty much without coral reefs in the next 30 to 40 years. My Catholic faith also has had a big impact. And the Catholic Church has a very rich history of kind of climate advocacy, climate justice. Back in 1971, Pope Paul VI said, due to an ill-conceived exploitation of nature, humanity runs the risk of becoming in turn a victim of this degradation. St. John Paul II, and this goes back to 1990, so keep in mind the timing here. The greenhouse effect, climate change, has now reached crisis proportions as a consequence of industrial growth, massive urban concentrations, and a vastly increased energy needs. And industrial waste, the burning of fossil fuels, unrestricted deforestation are known to harm the atmosphere and the environment. And I wish to repeat, the ecological crisis is a moral issue. Okay, and that's really important. This is a very serious moral issue. Pope Benedict XVI, believe it or not, he's known as a green pope. He installed solar panels on the Vatican. And so a portion of the Vatican is now powered by solar panels. And he said, how can we separate or even set at odds the protection of the environment and the protection of human life? That was back in 2010. So essentially he's saying climate change is a life issue. It's not just abortion, and abortion's evil. This is really serious for humanity. He also said, make polluters pay. In the Charity of Truth, he said, the economic and social costs of using up shared environmental resources should be fully borne by those who incur them, not by other peoples or future generations. And of course, Pope Francis has been perhaps the most vocal. He wrote the landmark encyclical Laudato Si back in 2015. We're coming up on the 7th anniversary. He was advised by the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences. He didn't go off in a corner and then get this revelation. He was advised by the top scientists in the world. The Academy dates the 1600s. Matter of fact, it's the oldest scientific organization on the planet. Many Nobel laureate members, the 70 and counting since 1902. And the consensus, the document is much more than climate change. It's about a lot of different things, but the consensus was related to climate change is real and is caused in significant part by humans. And I give this presentation or something similar to different faith groups, not just Catholics. And I would say that, I've given it to a Muslim group, I've given it to evangelicals, and you name it. And it's interesting when I dig into it, the faith summary for all of these faiths is pretty much the same. We are responsible to protect creation and all people, particularly the poor, who have contributed least to climate change, but are disproportionately impacted by it. It's a moral challenge to renew our relationship with God, one another, and a created world. And Catholics and mankind should take concrete steps to reduce consumption and do a better job caring for creation, which goes back to St. Francis of Assisi. And once again, why does it matter to me? Well, I got 3 beautiful daughters, and they've given me 5 beautiful grandkids. And Laudato Si, paragraph 159, I think says it really well. The world is a gift we have freely received and must share with others. The environment is on loan to each generation, which must then hand it on to the next. I think by almost any measure, you can say that we're not doing a very good job of handing on a world that's as nice as it was given to us. So what can be done? And this is where the simulator comes in. We can test choices on what can be done using the En-ROAD simulator. It was developed by Climate Interactive. But the program was actually developed as a research project by MIT and then MIT Sloan Business School. And then the Climate Interactive was a spinoff. But En-ROAD stands for Energy Rapid Overview and Decision Support. But I'm going to give you a quick overview. So what are we going to do? We're looking at the global effort to limit greenhouse gas emissions to less than 2 degrees C, preferably 1.5 degrees C. Well, I don't, honestly, at this point, 1.5 is a huge stretch goal. So I'm going to look at it in terms of 2 degrees C. So the background on the simulator. It's a transparent, freely available model that gives users a chance to design their own scenarios to limit future global warming. You can test your own assumptions and you get immediate feedback on likely impacts. This runs on a laptop or your PC at home. It's been carefully grounded in the best available science. Like you probably heard of the IPCC reports. All parameters and equations are published, open source, and been peer reviewed. So this actually is based on those. It's a simplified version of the equations and models that the IPCC uses. It's been calibrated against a wide range of existing integrated assessment models run on supercomputers, and that's what I'm talking about, the IPCC. And it's been compared to measured historical data. Hindcast essentially mean we have data on the climate. We know what's happened over the past few decades very, very well. And so then you calibrate your model with hindcast, the stuff that's actually happened. But then going forward, that's then a forecast. More in the future you go with a forecast, the less accurate it's going to be. But like any like weather forecasts today, you can predict pretty well in a day or two what the weather's going to be, but your predictions a week or two in advance is not going to be as good. And this is just an intro. Online trading is available. You can learn a lot more about the science behind the simulator. There is no lack of information on this website. It's quite detailed. I love this analogy that Climate Interactive provides. And basically, we're looking at CO2 in the atmosphere as being a bathtub. So we're approaching, like, the top of this bathtub, if you can imagine, is 2 degrees C. The problem we have is emissions are greater than net removals because we've disrupted the equilibrium that the planet used to be in. The problem, the world's emissions exceed net removal of CO2, and this was caused by the Industrial Revolution. So this was all started back in the 1850s and 60s when coal was used for the Industrial Revolution. En-ROAD investigates both reducing emissions, reducing this side of the equation, or increasing net removals. So you can look at both. The global emission reductions are needed to stabilize atmospheric greenhouse gas levels, to slow the temperature increase, sea level rise, and the rest of the associated problems. And there's things like on the net removal side, you can change farming practices, plant trees, technological advances like carbon capture and sequestration can enhance removal. So once again, you can attack the problem from one or both aspects. So I'm going to go to this now and give you what's going to be a really quick overview. This is the actual landing page for Climate Interactive. You can see that there's a ton of really useful and interesting information. You can search on, there's a lot of peer-reviewed paper data here that you can search on if you have a question. I'm going to go straight to the simulator. We're running this live right now. It's kind of a disclaimer, I think. And this is the home page. You can play around with it. I'm going to use the basic page. So just briefly, this graph here, the color graph, is the global sources of primary energy. Coal is brown, oil is red, natural gas is blue, renewables is green. So you can see it since 2000, the green is a very thin, but the wedge increases with time because we're seeing renewables increase presently. And so going back to the hindcast forecast, everything before 2022 is historical data. What this shows here is if we change nothing, what they call business as usual, this is the projected amount of coal, oil, gas, renewables that is likely to happen, once again, if the world doesn't change. We just keep doing what we're doing. This middle graph is the gigatons of CO2 produced. So you can see back in 2000, the world produced about 42, 43, whatever, gigatons. And then that went up to almost 60 at 2020. But as this is a real graph, you can see the little dip here down to 2022. And as you might expect, that is the pandemic impacts where the world used less energy, but we're now back on this upward slope. And the far right here is the temperature at 2100. And this basically represents business as usual. And it's actually a range, but this is probably mid-range of what the projected value is. And so as you can see, that's not good, 3.6 degrees centigrade, if we really want to keep it to 2 degrees. So there's each, and then below here is what the model will do for you by simply using these sliders. So the energy supply, we can go through like all these on the energy supply, coal, renewables, oil, nuclear. And I'm just going to show you some examples real quickly. So let's just say we're going to put a high tax on coal. So you can see what happens. So coal, as you imagine, usage goes down. You can kind of go back and forth and see what happens. And it changes the net amount of temperature increase by 0.2. You think, oh, that's not much. No, 0.2 is a lot. That's really good. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. And go back to the beginning. I can do the same thing for renewables or oil. I'm going to take a look at nuclear because I think this is instructive. One of the things on this, it's really cool about the program, you can get these drop down or drop ups. You can get more information, and I want more information on nuclear. And so what does this slider do? It encourages or discourages building nuclear power plants. Nuclear power production does not release carbon dioxide, but it produces, the other problem, it does have side problems. Everything, there is no free lunch, there's always side problems. But then I'm going to go back here then and show you. So let's incentivize nuclear. We're going to highly subsidize it. And lo and behold, it doesn't really impact the temperature that much, 0.1 degree. Well, the problem is, if you notice, it's a small percentage of the total energy mix anyway. But then look at the drop down. This is really instructive. The exajoules, the amount of energy produced by nuclear power plants, we made the decision here at 2022 to build nuclear power plants. But really, there's nothing helpful until 10, 15 years down the road. Why is that? Well, I think you all know it takes forever, a long time to get permits. It takes a long time to build them. So there is a lag, and they factor all this stuff in. This is not a simple program. There's a lot behind it. So that's one of the things that's really instructive. Maybe go back to the beginning. I'm going to now look in this segment here. We're going to be looking at how the energy supply is used, the transport. So transportation would then be cars, buses, trucks, trains, ships. And if you do things like, let's say, cafe standards, with cars, where you make it a requirement to have higher energy efficiency. So I'm going to do that slider just to see and that's a fairly good impact by requiring the fleet of cars and trucks and trains and everything that be more efficient. All right, so I'm going to take that back. You can electrify. This is also something that it might be counterintuitive a little bit. If you say we're going to highly incentivize electrification, it doesn't change much. And let's go back and kind of use these, go back and forth and look at it. So the thing to look at is actually when you increase electrification without doing anything else, you actually increase coal consumption. Once again, watch this. I'm going to put it back on. And the reason is that a lot of electricity is produced by coal. So if you electrify everything, you need more electricity. Then if you don't change anything else, you're going to get more coal consumption, which is kind of offsets anything good or the amount of good that can be had with electrification. Buildings, and then once again, anytime you want to look at it, here for buildings, you increase or decrease the efficiency of buildings, appliances, other machines. This is like not just buildings, but industry. It's not just like putting in more efficient lights and everything. It's actually, heat pumps and everything else. So if you put higher efficiency on that has a nice impact. And it seems to me efficiencies, is kind of low-hanging fruit. It's something that we should be doing. It's just my personal opinion. Okay, going back to the beginning. I'm not going to get into the growth aspects, but deforestation, if you can reduce the amount of deforestation, that's a good thing. But it doesn't have as much of an impact as one would perhaps like. Afforestation below here is like planting a trillion trees. And you've probably heard a lot of politicians saying, oh, this is the absolute solution to our problem. We're going to plant 1 trillion trees. And unfortunately, that is only a 0.1. So, but don't get me wrong, that's still good. That's a good thing, but it's not a silver bullet. And I'm going to do one last thing, or two last things. Methane's another one. This has a big impact. You decrease or increase greenhouse gas emissions from methane. A lot of, you probably have heard this too, cows produce quite a bit. So if we could change our diet to eating less red meat and also improve drilling, containment of methane from drilling operations or burning that, release of methane, that has fairly nice effect. But the one thing that I really want to show you is the carbon price. And the group that I'm involved in, Citizens Climate Lobby, has been working on with Congress, or basically trying to get them to enact a price on carbon. And the bill that we favor, there's actually one in the Congress right now, starts at $15 a ton. I'm going to put these in exactly the way it's in the bill. It's going to start this year. As soon as they can start this $15 per ton price on carbon, you're going to achieve the price in 1 year. You'll reach that price within 1 year. The final carbon price, we want to see the price go up by $10 per ton per year. And this isn't just Citizens Climate Lobby. There's a Climate Leadership Council and other groups that also are in favor of this. So it goes up $10 per ton per year. So by the end of the century, that's roughly 80 years, 80 plus 15 is $815. You want to start that immediately. The full price doesn't happen for 78 years. Okay, so this is the price profile. It starts low at $15 a ton, which is essentially, if you're talking about gasoline, about 10 or 11 cents per gallon. and then it goes up over time. It's not just gasoline, though, it's everything's in the any carbon fuel. And it goes up linearly so that you don't shock, you don't start it out at $600 a ton because that would shock the economy. This allows the economy to adjust. But lo and behold, look what happens. That it is clearly one of the best ways to impact the change in energy mix and increase renewables fast and decrease the use of fossil fuels. So it's, I'm going to get out of this now. Go back to the presentation. What are the insights that we've seen? There's no silver bullet. There's no single solution will solve the problem. To achieve about 2 degrees requires silver buckshot. I didn't show you this, but we could have gone back on top of carbon pricing. We could have done efficiencies and brought it down to 2 degrees. A carbon price is high leverage because it changes the fuel mix and reduces energy demand. And a good start is, it's the bill that we favor is House Resolution 2307. And leading economists and businesses support carbon pricing. And this is a quick summary of the carbon pricing. You place a fee on fossil fuels at the source. So at the well, the mine, or the port, starts at, once again, at $15 a ton and goes up $10 per year. But the thing about that we want in the bill is all the revenue, if it goes to the government, it's a tax. But if it comes back to the households, it's what you would call a dividend. And studies have shown about 2/3 of the population break even or receive more in a dividend check than they pay in higher prices. So how does that work? If you have a high carbon footprint, let's say you drive a Humvee, keep your house at 60 degrees in the summertime, you burn a lot of fuel, you pay in a high amount, and compare that to someone who lives in an apartment, and rides a bike to work. So they have a really low carbon footprint. Well, they make a lot of money and you pay a lot in. So that's how it works. And so by definition, poor people generally have a very low carbon footprint. The lowest quintile does very well on this with this. And it also, that's why the Catholic Church likes this approach, or some within the Catholic Church. And then there's a border adjustment. This is important because if let's say you're importing a barrel of oil and that like Indonesia doesn't have a tax, it gets charged at our border. And then if we have someone from like North Dakota sending a barrel of oil over to Indonesia, they get their money rebated. That's the level playing field. And that also forces the world to come onto the same system. So there's good news. Texas is a leader in renewable energy. And just this is a very recent graph. California leads the way, but Texas pretty much blows everybody away, no pun intended, with wind energy. You can see that we're second in the country for renewable energy. So we're doing a pretty good job here in the state of Texas. And this segment here, solar, is growing very quickly. As a matter of fact, Samson Solar is a $1.6 billion project near Dallas. It's the largest solar project in America. It's 1,300 megawatts, about 300,000 homes, 600 jobs supported over the 36-month construction, generate more than $250 million in landowner payments. It is good for the economy. And there's jobs. That's one of the things that's a kind of somewhat of a fallacy that, the oil and gas business is changing. And this is one of the places that there are great jobs coming up. As a matter of fact, I just gave a presentation to a renewable energy club up at Sam Houston State. And those kids are all in a good position now to get really good jobs when they get out of school. So there are 9 leading cities in the US. You can see them listed there. San Antonio is one of them, from Texas. Collective capacity, 3.5 gigawatts of solar power. And this is more than the entire country had a decade ago. And the US now has 121 gigawatts of solar power, enough for 23 million homes. But we really need to keep that going. And key business groups support carbon pricing. Business Roundtable. The Walmart CEO says a national market-based emissions reduction policy is critical. Chamber of Commerce says a market-based mechanism, and that's what this is, the bill is a market-based way to bring down carbon emissions. The API even support this. This is a complete 180 for them in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. They now support an economy-wide carbon pricing as a primary tool to reduce carbon emissions. And even Exxon CEO Darren Woods has said putting a price on carbon will allow policymakers to eliminate inefficient patchwork of regulations. And there's one thing that companies don't like is one administration comes in, sets a regulation, another administration comes in and reverses it. That's hard. They like something that's predictable. So call for political engagement. The USCCB said contact your senators. You know, it is okay to get involved with government. Contact your senators and urge greater US leadership to address climate change. This is way back in 2010. USCCB has not been very vocal on this lately, and I'm disappointed in that, but I think that they are coming around. Pope Francis, Laudato Si, paragraph 181, in the absence of pressure from the public and from civic institutions, political authorities will always be reluctant to intervene. So in other words, it's up to us to get them to act. So this is a really nice video. It's short.
And to bring to our public officials the demand that a real program addressing climate change and the exploitation of our natural resources go forward. The carbon tax is a central element of that because it's a way of ensuring in an economically sound manner that the carbon we put into the atmosphere is reduced in the years to come. It's eminently doable. But we won't do it as a country and as a world unless we all come together and are willing to make some sacrifices. The carbon tax is a way of making those sacrifices in a way that calls for the least amount of economic dislocation. It is the pathway we must follow in the future. And we must not say next year will be enough, or the year after that. In our understanding, we must act. We cannot be passive in this fight because it is the fight for the whole future of humanity. All of the beauties of our world, the biodiversity, that is such a richness that will bring so much to the future generations, and the beauty of our seas and our lands. All of these are at stake because we're using them all up. We're destroying them. We are undermining the very foundations of this great, beautiful world that God has given to us as gift, and that we will be handing on to our children and grandchildren as a tarnished gift, as a gift which is only a shadow of what we have received. So please, speak with your legislators, form groups to educate your communities about these issues, and know that as you do so, this is an action of faith. This is an action of the gospel. It is an action to which God calls you at this very moment.
Okay, so we'll wrap up now, but suggested actions. Get involved. All I ask is that, you think about the impact on you and future generations because it's huge. And the rate of change that's happening now is accelerating. I can promise you that. Act locally, share what you know about climate change with friends and family. That can be very difficult, but it is possible, and it can be kept very civil. Rex Tillerson, former CEO of ExxonMobil, and he also was in the Trump administration for a short time. I thought he said it really well. He said, thoughtful dialogue is the only path for making progress and developing solutions. If you're on the far right and the far left and you're yelling at each other, no progress is being made. You just need thoughtful dialogue from people with cool heads. consider carbon pricing. It's supported by leading economists and leaders of the business community. And this comes from a 2019 Wall Street Journal article signed by over 3,600 US economists, 27 Nobel laureates, basically the who's who of economists in universities across the United States, and the 4 former chairs of the Federal Reserve. They said carbon pricing is the most effective means to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed necessary. Unless you do things in combination or do it particularly with a carbon price, it won't happen fast enough. So if you want more information, I'm not here to sell CCL to you, but I am a member because it's nonpartisan. I hate the whole Democrat-Republican thing. I lobby with both. I've been in Democratic and Republican sessions. And there's a Wednesday night informational meeting every week. And then you can learn more about the Energy Innovation Act, energyinnovationact.org. And finally, this is any questions, kind of like that slide, because I mean, when I talk to kids in colleges, I ask them, how many have seen a clothesline, right? I know all of you guys have, but everybody, when I grew up, everybody had a clothesline in their backyard. Now, but nobody does that. So that's it.